we'll start, as we always do, at 25. Missouri drops all the way to 25. Missouri dropped a lot of spots, guys, in our ranking. And it was because they really never should have been up as high as they were, but we didn't have a choice. I mean, they had won all their football games, and we are getting to a point in the season where it's like, especially here in 2024, there's not that many undefeated teams left, right? That you could honestly put at the into the top 10 or anything like that. So Missouri was higher than what they should have been already, and I concede that notion, no doubt. We dropped them all the way to 25. I feel like that's fair. I mean, Missouri has lost one football game here, to Texas A&M, who's also lost one football game. So, it was kind of, and I'm going to flip over to kind of my rough draft of my top 25 here. I mean, look, the teams that we kind of had vying for those, the 21 through 25 spots, here are some of the honorable mentions here. Liberty, Nebraska, Navy, Texas Tech, and I included Vandy and Arkansas. They each have a couple of losses, so you wouldn't really be able to include them in the top 25 if you're really trying to make a ranking. That just wouldn't make any sense. So those are some of the kind of some of the teams that were right there at the forefront of my mind as far as getting through the 21 through 25s. 24, we've got Army. They were at 25 last week. They scoot up a spot. I try not to overreact, but I really do think Army's a good football team. Good teams win games. Great teams cover the spread. And Army, I'm not ready to say they're a great team or anything, guys, but they keep covering the spread, okay? And they did it again this week. They absolutely came out with authority and just put a whooping on their opponent this week. So Army is undefeated. Navy is as well. I mentioned them in honorable mentions. Got some armed services there vying for some top 25 spots. Pretty cool. Pitt at 23. I mean, this is where we're at in the season, guys. Pitt, comes out with a win. They were the underdog this past weekend on the road at North Carolina. I don't think North Carolina's a good football team, which is why I bet on Pitt and won some money on this football game. Pitt was a 2.5-point dog in that one. They end up winning by 10. Again, good point. Good teams win, great teams cover, and right now Pitt is undefeated, man, and that's just where we're at. Have they got impressive wins? No, they don't. But they're undefeated, and we have to respect what's happened on the field. Has Ohio State played anybody? No, they haven't either. So, take from that what you will. 22, Syracuse, they absolutely deserve it after also being a dog, going on the road all the way across the country, one of the longest trips that you're going to take as a college football athlete or college athlete in general. What else can I say about Syracuse at this point? Kyle McCord is, playing his ass off. And Fran Brown has got this team in a winning mentality. And there were times in that game against UNLV this past week where it seemed like things had swayed to UNLV's favor, and Syracuse is able to sway the momentum back. And just really impressive what Fran Brown has been able to do. And his homecoming there, coming back to his kind of home region there of New Jersey area where he grew up, I think is that was just a really, really good hire by Syracuse there. And it's paying dividends like literally immediately. Pretty cool to see. And then 21 SMU. I believe this is the first time that SMU has graced our top 25. They're better than I thought. We started the season. We were kind of lukewarm on the Mustangs, and I think they're a little bit better than what we thought. The defense played a lot better than what I thought they could this past weekend, and got that win over Louisville. SMU is, they've got one loss at this point, and it's not a conference loss, so they're going to be right in there with all the ACC contenders, and they're starting to work their way up the top 25 ranking after Rhett Lashley and company get a really good win this past week. What do you think about this group?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I like it. I think, starting where you left off with SMU, the move from Preston Stone to Kevin Jennings was obviously the right move. And I think that now Jennings has this offense rolling. We know what they are on defense. They're led by a defensive line, which if you got a defensive line, chances are you got a pretty good defense. SMU's got a pretty good defense. So I think that they're here to stay. This isn't a lot of these teams that you see on your screen right now probably are going to fade out at some point in the season. SMU may not be one of those. I think that they've got a pretty good program and pretty proven program at this point in the season. Syracuse, kind of the same way. I mean, Kyle McCord is second in the country in passes or passing yards per game, which is remarkable given where he was last year with Ohio State. Him coming into a new offense with less skill around him, and he's able to put up the numbers that he is now. Syracuse is throwing a lot. He had 63 pass attempts this past game. That is a lot of attempts, but he's been pretty effective. And I think that the defense is getting better week after week. There's a new system with Fran Brown coming in, but Syracuse, I like where they're at. I like where they're headed. Moving to Pitt, undefeated Pitt. This may be one of those that eventually gets weeded out, but we'll see. I like what Pitt's doing right now. They are a team that is playing for 60 minutes all the way throughout the game. Really like what they're doing there. And then Army, Hua, right? Let's go Army. We could have Navy there too, I think. Both teams are pretty comparative in what they're doing. Both obviously service academy teams, but really like what Army's doing. I think they might give Notre Dame a run for their money later on in the season, but really like where Army's at 5-0 right now. Really like what Monken is doing with this team, kind of revolutionizing the offense just a bit, and I think he's got them scoring a ton of points. They're definitely warranted to be in the top 25. And Missouri is probably a team that I think eventually fades out. They're definitely on a downhill slope right now, and not in a good way. They are trending downward pretty rapidly, and got blown out by Texas A&M. I don't know if Missouri can hang in the SEC this year. I think that they've got some serious question marks on both sides of the football now. Got exposed by Texas A&M's offense, which nobody had on their bingo card. I don't know if we'll be talking about Missouri much moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? That's kind of the thing, and this is kind of last call for Missouri because their schedule's so weak. There's only a couple more opportunities to really prove yourself this season for Missouri. So kind of last call here for Missouri to stand up and do something. But one thing that I've learned so far this season, and maybe a lesson that I've relearned this season, you can't overreact too much to some of these games. I think Texas A&M was an absolute buzzsaw this past Saturday, and I think that just about any team in the country would have walked into Texas A&M and had a hard time this weekend. I really do feel that way. Now, is Missouri a really good team? No, I'm not. I'm not here to to blow smoke up Missouri fans' butts or something. Like they're not even here, I'm sure. So yeah, I mean we'll see on Missouri, but this is pretty much last call for them, no doubt. All right, 20 through 16. We've got Boise State at 20. This is long overdue. Boise State should have been in here already. They should have been in the top 25 last week, and that's my fault. But here's the deal. What was holding me back was the fact that Boise State had a loss. And yes, I know it was to Oregon. I understand that Oregon's ranked high. I get it. But it just Boise State just didn't have like a win that I was just like, okay, here we go. This is why they should be here. But we're at the point in the season where enough people have dropped out of the top 25. It was a cleansing of teams from the top 25 this past week. I mean, Missouri is actually one of the few that lost that held in there just because of the mere fact that, they were up so high. Any higher than that, you didn't fall down quite as far. But anyway, Boise State is a good football team. We'll just kind of have to see where it goes with these non-Power 4 teams, but for now, we stick Boise State in there. Welcome to the top 25, Boise State. Indiana 19. Indiana's for real, guys. I'm telling you, I've been saying it. They're a wagon. I don't know what we were thinking, not betting on them this past weekend, Mason. I don't know what we were thinking. Why we bet on Indiana like once this year and won a couple of weeks ago, and they're just a wagon. They're really good, and with just pay attention to the teams that are in the Big Ten that are on our top 25 here, and you can kind of see where we've got Indiana as far as in the Big Ten. I think they're a lot better team than what people realize, just because of the fact that people aren't sitting around at the coffee shop or the bar talking about Indiana football. 18 Oklahoma. We're gonna find out. It's nut cutting time this week, right? It's Oklahoma, it's Texas, it's a rivalry game, and it's a new rivalry game born under the pretense of the SEC. And I can't wait to see it, Mason. Texas State Fair. It's going to be an outstanding football game. I've got a feeling that line is really high. We're going to talk about that game here in just a minute. Oklahoma was idle this past week. Texas was idle, so they kind of just hang around where they already were. We jumped Texas A&M all the way up to 17. They were around the 23 mark last week. Very impressive win. As I said, if Texas A&M plays like they played this past weekend, the rest of the season, they'll be in the college football playoff. There's zero doubt about that in my mind. And they'll have a real good chance against Texas at the end of the season, because the team I saw out on the field this past Saturday for Texas A&M was unlike any other Texas A&M team that I've seen the rest of the year, and it's the best one that I've seen that they've put on the field in a few years, for sure. So I am really interested to see what level of consistency that Connor Wegman being back in the lineup is going to be able to provide the Aggies. 16, Utah. I don't know what to think about Utah. I heard Cam Rising's finger is about 3/4 of the way grown back. If you didn't know, his whole finger got ripped off apparently, and he couldn't play football. It's about 3/4 of the way grown back. It's a little hairier than the rest of them, but it looks like he is going to be back at some point. We just don't know when. And if he's not playing, then fade Utah as far as betting and things like that. I mean, they lost to Arizona. Absolutely no sense in that. I don't know what to think about Utah, but they're hanging in here like a hair in a biscuit, and we just kind of have to leave them alone until we figure out who wins or loses the Cam Rising contest here. Don't know when he's coming back. I'm tired of looking into it, tired of talking about it. We'll see him when he gets back. What do you think about this group?
Yeah, I mean, Utah, I don't know if I've ever seen a team that is so hamstrung without their starting quarterback. I think Isaac Wilson has gotten better as he's gotten more reps and more playing time, but we really need Cam Rising back for betting purposes, because with him, I think that Utah is a wagon. But we'll just have to wait and see. I wouldn't trust Utah as far as I could throw them. This isn't. I mean, 16 is kind of low, honestly, for what this team's ceiling is. And I think that with Cam Rising, they get closer to that ceiling. The issue is he's on a freaking milk carton right now. We're wondering where or when he'll be back. Texas A&M, obviously a huge win here. I think Texas A&M just kind of turned the corner this week, about midway through the season here, and I think you're going to start seeing Texas A&M playing more and more like they did against Mizzou moving forward. I had in my preseason predictions, I had Texas A&M losing on the bookends here against Notre Dame, which they did, and then against Texas at the end of the year, and I have them winning the 10 games in the middle. I was starting to think that was a little bit overzealous, but with Connor Wegman's return and him returning to form, I think Texas A&M is a playoff team like we had predicted. Oklahoma, I mean, they're hanging on by a thread. I think they've got their work cut out for them this week against Texas, obviously, but OU is a good defense. That they have a good defense, and I think that Hawkins is figuring some things out with this offense. He adds a different element than I think Jackson Arnold did, and I'm anxious to see what this offense looks like coming off of a bye week, preparing strictly for Texas for 2 weeks pretty much. And we'll have to wait and see. I think that they'll have some extra wrinkles in this offense, but we'll get to that game here in a minute. Indiana, Really like what they're doing. I want to see a little bit stronger defense from them. I mean, giving up, what was it, 24 points to Northwestern. Didn't really like seeing that, but I do think that this is a good IU team. Anxious to see them moving forward. And then Boise State, like you said, they deserve to be in this last week. We didn't have them in there, but Boise State is a freaking wagon. Ashton Genty is the man. I mean, this guy, he's got what, over 1,000 yards already? Yeah, 1,031 yards on 95 carries and 16 touchdowns already. I mean, those are outstanding stats for a running back at the end of the year. I think that this is definitely a Heisman hopeful. Might be a Heisman winner when it's all said and done, especially if he can take his team to the college football playoffs. But really like what this offense is doing. Put up over 60 points this past week, 62-30. They beat Utah State, which is a bad team. But they're doing what they can with their schedule. I think at the end of the year, they got Wyoming and Oregon State. They got to get there undefeated for sure. But I mean, it's a team that held Oregon, who might be a championship team, to 37-34. I mean, they kept it within a field goal. So it's a really good team. I'm excited to see what they do moving forward and what they might be able to do in the playoffs. I think Boise State at the 12 spot, if not higher. I mean, by the end of the year, I think that they could upset some teams in the playoffs, or at least one team. But we got to get there first. We got a long way to go for that. I like them in the 20 spot right now. We'll see if they can keep climbing up.
And it depends on what, who else gets put in that little side of the bracket. That's going to be a fun little wrinkle this season whenever we're talking about the college football playoff. And, man, there's going to be teams that are absolutely blessed by which corner of the bracket they end up in. And there's going to be teams that are just going to be like, wow, there's no way we can scale this mountain. So it's going to be interesting to see how all that works out. And we do have a updated college football playoff prediction bracket. We'll put that up at the end of this top 25 here. Rob Baker. Hey, what's up, Rob? See him there in the comment section. Anybody watching, I'd like to know what you think about the top 25 here. So who did I miss? Right? Who should be here? Who shouldn't? Rob Baker had said, excited for the Ohio State game this weekend. I'm fortunate enough to be able to go. Keep up the good work. Love the content. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. And, man, what I would do to be a fly on the wall in Eugene, Oregon this weekend. Holy cow, man. That is going to be a lot of fun. You are a blessed man, Rob. Enjoy that. I would love to go see that. Bucket list, man. Maybe one day. All right. 11 through 15. Kansas State, we've got at 15. And look, so we had Utah below Kansas State here. If Cam Rising is not playing, Kansas State is the better football team. If Cam Rising is playing for Utah, then I think Utah might be the better football team. But Utah lost most recently. Okay, BYU hasn't lost, who's there at the number 14 spot. So there you kind of have our layout there as far as the Big 12 goes. So you've got Iowa State that we're going to get to here in a minute. They're ranked a little bit higher. They're undefeated. And then BYU's undefeated, and then everybody else has got a loss there in the Big 12. And Oklahoma State just totally took a dump down the back of their legs. So they're out of the Big 12 race at this point. Got absolutely mollywopped by West Virginia this past weekend. That team is just absolutely falling apart. So, as I said, BYU at 14, well-rounded football team. I need to look. I can't remember who they have next, but BYU's schedule is just they've already went through some of the big lumps on their schedule. So it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out because as well-rounded of a football team as they are, I don't think they're great at anything really. But they're decent. They're decent enough to where the rest of these games, man, I'm not sure. We'll kind of have to dig into that, I guess, another time. But 13 LSU, you could argue LSU lower than this. They've got a big game coming up this week against Ole Miss. They'll be, I believe, hosting Ole Miss. Was that right? Is it at LSU or is it?
It's at LSU.
Right. Okay. So LSU hosting Ole Miss. That's going to be a really big game this weekend, obviously. So we'll talk about that. Both teams having one loss. It looks like a trend this year. We're going to have a lot of these big one loss matchups here, and where one team obviously has to go to two losses. And man, it's going to add a whole another element to the regular season here. That'll be a very, very interesting game. Notre Dame at 12. They were idle this past weekend. Notre Dame, they're pretty much cleared for takeoff the rest of the way, man. They just don't really have a hard schedule the rest of the way. Going to be favored in every single game. Um, Notre Dame is going to kind of float around this 12 spot, and they're going to have some help as far as, the college football playoff and things like that. I think they're going to have a little bit of help. But, that's part of not joining a conference, and that's Notre Dame's fault. So if you have a conference or a conference championship, then, you don't have to rely on other teams to, crap their pants for you to be able to get in the playoff. But anyway, Notre Dame is just going to be kind of hanging out there until we can kind of figure out the rest of some of these teams. So they're kind of just stuck in limbo here around 10 to 15. Clemson at 11. Clemson went on the road this weekend and beat the mighty, the powerful, the Seminoles. I joke because the Seminoles are they're at an actual dumpster fire. I saw a video in the last little hurricane thing that we had down in Florida. God bless everybody that's had to deal with that. I mean, it's just been unbelievably terrible. But it was a news shot down in Florida. It was one of those cameras like on the telephone pole or whatever, and it was this big dumpster floating in the water, right? And it was in this courtyard of this apartment complex. And I thought, man, I ought to screenshot that and just put the little FSU logo on it. I mean, because that's like the perfect depiction of their program right now. An empty dumpster floating in nasty water. That's what Florida State is right now. So we can only give Clemson so many of their flowers on that one. They did what they were supposed to do. They beat the spread. They beat Florida State, or at least they beat the spread from earlier in the week. If you got the line in time, I think Clemson's a decent football team. Now, I think they're just clearly like the second best ACC team at this point. Miami, obviously, I think is number one. We'll talk about them in a few minutes. They had one hell of a interesting day yesterday out in Cal. But with Louisville kind of stepping to the side and excusing themselves from the, really what I think, the conversation of the ACC championship, I think Louisville's kind of to the side right now. And I believe Clemson is, again, kind of like Notre Dame, kind of cleared for takeoff here until they get to later in the season. And they really benefited from Florida State not being on their game this season. That was one of the premier games of their schedule and one of the premier games that college football fans look forward to every year. So it was really kind of a bummer this past weekend that Florida State has got to be, in this perpetual state of protest. Whatever they're still whining about last year, and you can see it every week when they step on the field. It's really pitiful. 11 through 15. What do you think about these guys here, Mason?
Yeah, I mean, starting with Clemson, going to your comment that Miami's clearly number one. I don't know anymore. I mean, obviously Miami's undefeated. They're going to be ranked higher than Clemson right now, but I do feel like Clemson can give Miami a run. I don't believe they play each other this year, but in the ACC championship game, I don't know who I would pick. We'll have to wait and see when we get there. There's a chance both these teams end up with a loss before it's all said and done. Clemson's obviously would look better with a loss to Georgia, but Clemson looks really good, and I think that we all kind of sold our Clemson stock after the Georgia game, probably a bit prematurely. But now it seems like they're finding a rhythm on offense. We know what their defense is. I like Clemson right now. I think that they're a pretty good team and a team that I've got to make the college football playoff. Notre Dame, you hit the nail on the head. They've got an opportunity to win every game ahead of them, right? Much like any team, but Notre Dame's going to be favored in every game on their schedule moving forward. They do have a couple of doozies. USC, I think that Navy and Army both are pretty tough games now. Also, Georgia Tech on the schedule. I mean, they've got a few there that they could probably slip up and lose. But And that's going to be an interesting question at the end of the year. Does Notre Dame deserve to be in with the loss to NIU? Maybe so. Maybe so. We'll have to see. It kind of depends on what other people do, what other teams are doing throughout the season, whether or not Notre Dame's going to get into the playoffs. But I think we have them rightly ranked here at 12 at this point in the season. LSU, they've gotten better. They've gotten better since week one. Shame on them for losing week one again. But I like LSU right now. I think that they've figured some things out on the defensive side of the football. We're gonna have to wait and see, though. This week against Ole Miss, it's gonna certainly be a test for them on defense and on offense as well. Ole Miss is actually a defensive-led program right now, so really interesting matchup between those two coming up this week. But I like where we're at with LSU right now. I think that they are a team that is probably not done playing in these big games and winning a big game or two this year. Definitely one to watch. BYU, look, I haven't watched a ton of BYU this year, I'll be honest with you, but I know they're undefeated. I know that they're a solid program. I just want to see them be consistent. I can't buy into the BYU stock right now. I think that they're rightly ranked at 14, but I don't know if they're the 14th best team in the country from a power rating perspective. That's not what this is. This is a ranking. But anxious to see BYU moving forward as they do have some pretty decent games coming up. They got Arizona this week. They get Utah later in the season. Oklahoma State, UCF, Kansas, Arizona State, and Houston. But the two main ones to circle are Utah and Arizona there, obviously. So let's see what they do against Arizona this week, who is coming off of a win against Utah. And
Texas Tech beat them.
Well, yeah, but that's what I was going to say. They beat Utah 2 weeks ago, and then right. A hard loss to Texas Tech. That game was back and forth the entire game, but Texas Tech is pretty good
Texas Tech
too,
is somehow 5-1. I don't know,
right?
And they didn't make the top 25 because I'm not going to sit here and pull them up, but go look at who they beat this season. It's garbage.
This is the Big 12, though. This is what we expected. This is going to be a chaotic conference this year. I don't expect BYU to stay undefeated, but that doesn't mean that they're not the best team in the Big 12. We'll wait and see on that. And then Kansas State it's a team that laid an egg, a couple weeks ago, but I think that Kansas State could come back and win the Big 12. They've got the guys to do it on offense and defense. They're on a tightrope right now. After the loss, I think that they've really got to continue to improve, and I think that they will. But they've got some big games on their schedule coming up too. I like them at 15.
Yeah, I think Kansas State has got the most pop potential from all these teams, in my opinion. We'll see. Number 10, Iowa State. They just keep winning. And we have to respect the wins on the field. Eventually we're going to get to see Iowa State, play somebody that we're interested in watching the game. That hasn't really been the case. We had the Iowa State game, and I think for most college football fans around America, unless you are from Iowa or whatever, that's probably about all you've watched of Iowa State this season, and all you've really had a reason to watch of Iowa State. So, are you pulling up their schedule by chance?
Yeah, they got West Virginia this weekend at West Virginia.
Hey, West Virginia is hot right this second. Who do they have remaining on their schedule?
So they got West Virginia, UCF, Texas Tech, Kansas, Cincinnati, right? Those are all winnable games for Iowa State. I expect them to win all of those. Then they end the season at Utah and versus Kansas State. Definitely their two toughest games of the season on the end. Yeah.
Yep. I remember that now. That's right. So this Big 12 situation is going to go right down to the wire. That's it's going to go right down to the wire. So Iowa State does not play BYU.
Right.
Okay. All right. Interesting stuff there in the Big 12. It's going to be a hell of a race to the finish line. Number 9, the Tennessee Vols. Obviously had to drop them this week after they take a loss on the road to an unranked Arkansas team. Arkansas, looking back at it and called me Captain Hindsight or whatever. Hindsight's 2020, blah blah blah. Arkansas was a team late in the weeds. They absolutely were. Look, Kansas State, when they lost to BYU earlier this season, it was because of turnovers, right? And it was a turnover laden game, especially early in that football game. Arkansas's done that every single week, just about, until this past week, and then all of a sudden they just stopped turning the ball over this past week, and apparently that was all that they needed to be able to win a big football game, because we knew Arkansas's defense was decent. We knew the offense was putting up numbers as far as yardages and things like that. It was putting points on the board, and a lot of the points were taken off the board by driving down the field and then turning the ball over. Arkansas didn't do that this past weekend. And Tennessee is a defensive-led football team right now. They did not have the offense to be able to pull themselves, out of this situation. We talked about it multiple times on the front half of the season. Tennessee's offense is not a finished product. A first-year starting quarterback is never going to be, just some kind of, well, I won't say never, because, we have seen some crazy stuff happen, but it was always asking too much of Nico to come in here and be able to put this team on his shoulders right off the bat. We didn't talk about it a ton last night, as far as we talked about the game, but we didn't talk about what I'm about to say in particular. Mason, as a Georgia fan, I'm sure you remember a guy named Reggie Ball that played quarterback for Georgia Tech. And some Georgia fans probably remember what I'm talking about, but I don't know if your average college football fan will remember this. But Reggie Ball was Georgia's best player in that game. And understand what I just said. Reggie Ball played for Georgia Tech, but he was Georgia's most valuable player every time we played him. He did the dumbest stuff at the end of games. Threw the ball into the crowd, right? Their last chance of the game to win the game as time expired that last year. I specifically remember that. Nico pulled a Reggie Ball at the end of this game and ran out of bounds with no time on the clock and didn't even take a shot at the end zone. Why? Where is your head at? And that's a first-year starter type of thing to do, and it just further accentuates the point that this offense just isn't championship caliber yet. The offensive line was an issue this past weekend. Nico wasn't ready to put the offense on his back. There's no shame in that. He's a first-year starter. We can't expect that. Tennessee is right where they need to be. All their goals are still right in front of them. That nobody's winning the SEC with an undefeated record this season. I seriously doubt it. So, and I think there's a good possibility there might be even a team that wins it with 2 losses. I think that is certainly possible this season. So everything that Tennessee wants is still in front of them. We'll see how things develop. We got that big game looming in Knoxville against Alabama, which leads us to number 8 here. Alabama just absolutely goes from atop the mountain to the lowest of the lowest valleys. They beat Georgia. That was Alabama's Super Bowl for the season so far, right? They win their Super Bowl, and then the very next week go and drop a game to Vanderbilt. Mason, we didn't talk about this on last night's show either, I guess. So Malachi Moore, I didn't notice it at the end of the Vanderbilt game. Maybe you did. Did you see where Malachi Moore, they were setting the ball up for Vandy to go into victory formation, and Malachi Moore goes up and kicks the ball and is yelling at his coaches on the sideline and all this stuff. And it was not a good look. Yesterday was a really, really bad day for Alabama fans and for, I think, the Alabama program in general. It was pretty ugly. And what was so ugly about it also is the fact that Vandy just lined up and straight beat their ass. This wasn't a fluke football game. A lot of times you see this and you think, man, Alabama had 600 yards, but they turned the ball over 4 times. Alabama did turn it over a couple times, but Vandy beat them in every conceivable statistic you want to look at in that football game. They straight up lined up and whooped their ass. and it is what it is. Does it mean anything for the longevity of Alabama over the duration of the 2024 season? I don't really think so. Welcome to 12-team playoff world. I don't think it makes that big a difference, other than the fact that now Alabama and Tennessee, when they meet up in Knoxville, one of those teams is walking out of there with 2 losses. That's the biggest outcome of that Vanderbilt win over Alabama, in my opinion. Number 7, Ole Miss. We're going to talk about them here in a few minutes a little bit. They're going to be facing off against LSU in Death Valley this weekend. Going to be a really, really, really good game, I think. I think LSU has taken some strides forward defensively. I think they're still an offensive-led football team, but I think they've made some adjustments with Blake Baker being the DC. I think Ole Miss is going to have their work cut out for them offensively in that football game. But I think Ole Miss's defense is where their strength lies at this point, and I think it's a really good one. Georgia at number 6. Honestly, Georgia, my thoughts have kind of just went up and down on this team throughout the season, right? I mean, even from half to half. Kirby Smart came out and was complaining about the crowd, talking about the crowd noise this past weekend and saying the fans weren't as into the game as they should have been. And but meanwhile, Georgia's playing Auburn, who's now lost 3 or 4 games this season. So it's just Georgia is getting ready to host Mississippi State. They should have no problem in that football game. But you got some huge matchups looming. There's questions about this Georgia offense and defense. And like the rest of these teams in the top 10, Georgia is an imperfect team. But if you want to look at their loss, of anybody who's got a loss here in the top 10, Georgia has the best loss. And they also have one of the best wins of the season. So it's hard to sink Georgia really any farther than 6 at this point. I mean, Clemson's a good win. Alabama's a good loss. And where you can't say that about, Alabama's got a great win and they've got one of the worst losses in the country, right? So it's kind of tough here. You got Alabama who's beat Georgia head to head. I try to avoid that at all costs, right? Putting a team that's lost to somebody, but what am I to do when Alabama goes out and craps their leg in Nashville? I mean, there's nothing I can do about this. Alabama is at 8, Georgia's at 6. Cry about it. What do you think, Mason?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Looking at Georgia, I'm not very high on this team. I don't think Georgia's winning the national championship this year. They're probably going to make the playoffs, but to me, I think Georgia's a fringe playoff team at this point in the season. But what do you do when they've beaten Clemson and then lost a really close game to Alabama? I mean, that they deserve to be number 6. But I'll just kind of leave it at that. I said yesterday, I'm putting Georgia on the shelf for now. We'll see in a couple weeks when they play Texas if they can get up for that game.
Man.
I know.
Come on, man.
I'm gonna watch every game.
Don't jump off, man. It's too early. I'm telling you.
Hey, I'll watch every game, but I'm telling you, I don't like what I see.
We've switched positions here because 2 weeks ago,
a week ago.
A week
After
ago,
Alabama
I was
loss.
saying what you were saying, and now we've switched places. Look, Georgia's.
Yep.
I know exactly what you're saying, and this isn't the best Georgia team that we've seen over the last 5 years, and I get that, but that doesn't mean anything. Georgia's not going to have to play 2021 Georgia or 2019 LSU this year or 2020 Bama. I'm telling you, Georgia's got just as good a chance as anybody at this point.
If they get healthy, I mean, they're missing some key pieces. They're missing a couple of guys on the interior of the defensive line. I think that's where they're weakest at is on the defensive line. But the issue is, even if you get back the interior of the D-line, you still got to have your defensive ends set the edge. They're not setting the edge. You can run on the perimeter on Georgia all day long, and that concerns me. I think missing your starting center and probably the best guard in college football, that obviously doesn't help your running game. But then also you've got a 240-pound running back that's been out, who had a turf toe surgery before the season started. Don't know where he's at. If he gets healthy by the end of the year, I think that's a huge help, not just in the run game, but also in pass protection. I mean, if you got a 240-pound running back there blocking 240-pound defensive ends, you got a pretty good shot at getting those blocks. But I'm not really high on Georgia right now. I thought that they would come out and make a little bit more of a statement against Auburn, and I just saw some fundamental issues. They were still missing tackles against Auburn. I don't know. I don't know. Well, I'm going to have to wait and see when they play Texas. I mean, if they lose to Texas, I think that they're probably not going to be favored anyways. But we'll see. We'll see when that game comes. I might be back on the Georgia wagon after that if they go to Austin and win that game. But not really feeling good for my dogs right now. Ole Miss comes back and beats South Carolina handedly. They score 3 points. I really like this Ole Miss defense, and we'll get into the breakdown of LSU here in a minute, but I really like this Ole Miss defense. I think that they're better than people even realize right now, and I think that they're actually a defensive-led program, and you could see that this week against LSU. Alabama, I think that they're I'm with you, Mark. I don't like putting a team that beat a team head-to-head below a team, but at some point in the season, you've got to do it. You've just got a sample size big enough where it's going to happen. Some teams are going to lose some games they shouldn't, and it is what it is. You got to count the quality of your loss as heavily as you do the quality of your wins sometimes. In this case, in a head-to-head, I think that Alabama does sink below Georgia at this point. Now we're kind of wondering what Alabama team we're going to get week to week. I don't want to bet on Alabama for the foreseeable future because I don't know what I'm getting at this point. Are we getting what looks like the best team in college football and the best offense in college football, or are we getting a team that can't stop the run and gets 40 points scored on them against teams that are lower third offenses in the SEC? I don't know. So. Also putting Alabama on a shelf. We're going to have to wait and see from Alabama. They got a good game with Tennessee in a couple of weeks, and moving to number 9 with Tennessee. But talking about Alabama and Tennessee together, they're very similar teams. They both were top 5 last week, top 4, and then lose and get devastated, take a loss to teams that they have no business losing to. And now they both have get-right games. Alabama's going to face South Carolina this week. Tennessee's facing Florida. So they get the game that they can get right in, and then they got to go face one another. And look, all bets are off at this point. That's going to be one heck of a game. It's a pick 'em in my opinion. I don't know which way that one's going to go, but it's going to be really fun to watch. And then we'll know more about the teams after that, I think, moving forward. Then Iowa State, the Cyclones, really like Rocco Becht, really like the defense for Iowa State right now. In year 2 of this new system, I think the Cyclones are in a prime position to steal the heart of all the other Big 12 teams this year and be kind of that darling team in the SEC, or excuse me, in the college football playoffs by the end of the year. The Cyclones are pretty fun to watch, so I'm excited to see what they do moving forward.
1 through 5, Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Miami. So you've got 4, 5 undefeated teams here in the top 5. Miami is I'm trying to figure out what to make of them at this point. They seem like kind of like a TCU a couple of years ago, where it's like they're barely winning these football games and just all these emotional roller coasters week to week. Very fun to watch. I mean, just absolute thrill to watch. I mean, unbelievable comeback yesterday. They're in the ACC, though, man. And I just don't think they're going to get really, really tested until they get to an ACC championship game or, obviously a college football playoff berth. I think Miami's in just as good a shape as anybody to make the 12-team football playoff. I'm interested to see how they're going to be able to hold up, in a situation where they're playing teams that are more like them. They're struggling with teams like Cal and Virginia Tech right now, and I don't know, man. I don't. They're fun to watch. I'll give them that. Cam Ward is really, really fun to watch. He's got a very interesting style about him. We'll see what happens with them. They barely pulled that thing out last week, and I mean, you can honestly thank some man. You can thank some refs again in this game last night. Or early this morning. The refs kind of bail them out there at the end of the game again, and hey, it is what it is. You'd rather be lucky than good, I guess. Sometimes. Number 4, Penn State. I'm not in love with Penn State. Um, I'm just not in love with the offense. I love the defense. I think it's really, really good. I think the run game is obviously really, really good. 2 amazing running backs there again this season. Drew Aller, I feel like, has maybe taken a step forward, but then every time I think he's taken a step forward, they play a game and do their 3 yards in a cloud of dust thing, and I just Penn State's really good at what they do. Are they going to win a championship doing that? I just have a hard time believing that, man. And in the preseason, we talked about Penn State and the deficiencies that they had in the wide receiver room. Those are only going to accentuate themselves as the season goes on. You're only going to have more injuries. You don't gain players throughout the season. I don't know. I like Penn State regular season wise. And I think they got a great chance to make the 12-team playoff, but I don't know about this team winning a championship. And whenever we're in the top 5 here, I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about winning championships. Really, this year, top 15, because there's probably 12 or 13 teams that can win a championship this season. Oregon at number 3. There are, just like every other team on this list, there's chinks in the armor for Oregon. We've seen Oregon play some close games this season. I'm not particularly in love with the run game. Now, I know what people will say. We ran the ball so well this past week, and there was, at the beginning of that football game, ran the ball really well. But then whenever you needed to run it and kind of run the clock out and do your thing, you kind of let Michigan State creep back in there for a 21-point victory, which is, in football, that's not a close football game or anything. Oregon doesn't seem like an elite football team quite yet. Have we seen the best of their team? We're halfway through the season. I wouldn't expect to have seen the best from Oregon yet. You wouldn't have wanted to see the best of Oregon yet. You want to save your best for last, especially in a 12-team playoff. It's about who can get healthy and hot. And Oregon has all the tools necessary to get healthy and get hot here at the end of the season, but they're going to be in a big, big matchup this week hosting Ohio State, who's at our number 2 spot. It's going to be number 2 versus number 3. Cannot wait to see that one. Ohio State hasn't proved anything yet. We've got to see them in a game against a team with a pulse. We haven't got to see that yet this season. They've played 2 Power 4 teams all season, right? So we have yet to see what Ohio State's really about. A lot of new pieces. Will Howard, new offensive coordinator, Kelly there. You got the new Smith. You got the new wide receiver. There's just a lot of new going on. Quinshon Judkins. I want to see all these pieces and how they work together on this offense. I'm trying to figure out what kind of offense this is going to be, and it's hard to tell whenever they've got such a scripted approach to playing teams that really don't have any reason to be on the field with a team like Ohio State, right? So I feel like we haven't got a true depiction of what Ohio State's going to look like under pressure, and I think we're going to definitely get to see that this weekend, as Oregon is going to be a formidable matchup for them. And then Texas at number 1. The longer the season goes on, the worse the Michigan win looks. But as far as like point differentials and things like that, Texas has just done everything that they needed to do. Their starting quarterback went down. They didn't skip a beat. They're still creaming people, right? So Texas has passed all the tests so far. And nobody's been able to step up and question what we thought in the preseason were the deficiencies of this football team. The middle of that defensive line. I don't think they have the playmakers that, we would normally see out of a national championship team, if Texas is going to be going, and playing for a national championship. Sweat's gone. Murphy's gone off that defensive line. Running back room is very, very thin. these are some questions that we have about Texas, and we've yet to see any teams be able to, stand up to them in the effect of, being able to test some of those areas out. We're going to see that. It's a matter of time. And I think Oklahoma is going to be able to test them in a lot of ways this weekend, a lot of ways in which they haven't seen. I think Oklahoma's got the best defense that Texas has faced this season. And it'll be interesting to see which Oklahoma offense shows up this weekend. We're going to talk about that game here in a few minutes. What do you think about the top five here, Mason?
Well, yeah, starting with Miami. I mean, they squeak out another close win. Admittedly, I didn't go back and watch this game yet. It was on too late, too early this morning for me, being on the East Coast. But I thought Miami was about to take a loss last night and ended up coming back and winning that game. They show a lot of grit, a lot of fight. I'm wondering if they're going to be dominant enough to win the ACC and make the college football playoff and stay in the top five, throughout the season. We'll have to wait and see on them, but I do like the pieces. I really like their defensive line. I'm just waiting on them to kind of show up and play a complete defense. I think they've got a lot of deficiencies on the back end, but usually a good defensive line will kind of mask that, and I haven't seen that yet from Miami. I want to see them continue to get better as the season goes on. But right now they're undefeated, so they deserve to be where they're at. Kind of the same with Penn State. I mean, but Penn State hasn't played anybody. I really feel like Penn State is about the same team as Michigan, but with a much easier schedule. I mean, when you look at who Penn State has played, they played West Virginia, they played Bowling Green, which they gave up 27 points to Bowling Green, Kent State, Illinois, which was a good win. They won 21-7 against Illinois. Beat UCLA this past week. Now they got to go play at USC. That is going to be a little bit of a test, but USC is not the team that we thought that they were just 2 weeks ago, at this point. Then they go and face Wisconsin at Wisconsin. They've got Ohio State. Obviously, that is where you kind of measure yourself, is against Ohio State, which I think is the standard in the Big Ten right now. But after that, they've got Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland. I mean, we could be looking at a Penn State team that makes the college football playoff by default because they're 10-2 or 11-1 with a loss to Ohio State and probably isn't a top 12 team. I'm projecting a little bit too hard probably here for this top 25, but I just want to put into perspective kind of where Penn State is at. I know I've already seen comments about from the AP poll, with Penn State coming in at number 4 in the AP poll as well, ahead of Georgia and some other teams that would obviously be favored on a neutral site in that matchup against Penn State. But at this point, they're undefeated, and we can only put them where they are based off of their records. When you're talking about a ranking, this isn't a power rating, right? Penn State will show us who they are probably this week. We'll see. Oregon, and I'll throw Ohio State in this too, right? Oregon's been tested a little bit more, obviously, with Boise State being a really good program. I mean, we thought that a 3-point win from Oregon was them sleeping, but it really wasn't. I think Boise State's pretty dang good. Is Boise State a top 5 power rated team? No, they're not. They're definitely not. But Boise State is good enough to, if you're playing them in week 2 and you're still figuring out your team, I think that they can wreak some havoc and cause some upsets. And Oregon was lucky enough to get by without getting upset in week 2. But with this game coming up between Oregon and Ohio State, I think that we're really going to see both of these teams. And I don't want to get too much into my preview. We'll be doing that preview here in just a minute. But I think we're going to see both of these teams get tested. And I think we're going to see both of these teams put everything out on the table. All the cards will be on the table in this game. Who's better right now at this point in the season? I think right now it's probably Ohio State, but I like the playmakers for Oregon. I think that they may have a better team defensively as far as the playmakers go, but Ohio State might be a better all-around defense. And then offensively, I think they're very comparable. I think that they've got two above average quarterbacks and some good skill position players. But this is going to be a really fun game. I don't think that either team loses and slides too far out of the top five. Obviously you gotta keep the teams that are undefeated ahead of them, but it's going to be a slobber knocker. I can't wait to watch that game. But I think Ohio State and Oregon are right where they should be at 2-3. And then moving on to Texas, you kind of took the words out of my mouth, Mark. We haven't seen Texas get to play a team that can exploit their deficiencies on the back end of the defense, in the middle of their defense. I don't know when we will see that. It may be against Georgia. It may be against Oklahoma this week. I'm not sure who's going to be the team that can come up and challenge them offensively. But when you look at Texas's offense, they're really dang good. Possibly the best offense in the country. I think we get Quinn Ewers back this game against Oklahoma. But I don't know who's going to match up well against Texas. There really are no deficiencies on their offense, except for maybe their deficiencies at running back, and that's just a lack of depth. It's not because they don't have good players. There's just a lack of depth in the running back room right now. Who they have are healthy and talented, but young. I don't know. Texas's offense is for real. They can overcome the deficiencies on defense with how well their offense is playing in Steve Sarkisian's scheme, nonetheless, who's one of the best offensive minds in college football, I think, right now. But Texas is clearly number one. I don't think that that's up for debate right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe you could say Ohio State, but I mean, Ohio State doesn't have a win as good as Texas. There's no argument there. So I agree with you. Texas undefeated, got one pretty decent win there. They deserve to be number one. We've got a college football playoff predictor here. Mason, this is your baby. You want to take us through this bad boy and kind of tell us where we're at here? Looks pretty similar to what we had to begin the season, minus Michigan, add in Boise State, right?
Yeah, minus Michigan, add in Boise, take out Notre Dame, add in Clemson, and I think that this is where we're at. I think this is a pretty good little picture of what we can project the college football playoffs to be. And I don't want to make the regular season all about the playoffs. That's not my point in doing this. But we just had a week like we did. I'm not doing this every week, right? But when we have a week like we did, I think it's fair to kind of take a pause and just refocus or I guess reproject what the college football playoff could look like. I think that Boise State at 12 makes a lot of sense. I think that Boise State could be even higher than 12 by the end of the season if they win out. But I think right now they are the team outside of the Power Four that does get in, and I don't really see that being debated very much right now with how their offense is performing. Texas A&M, I probably wouldn't have had them in this top 12 had they not done what they did last week against Missouri. We did have them at 11 in the preseason, but I had kind of faded them out for the most part. Now, seeing what they put on film against Missouri, playing like an offense that I thought that they would, and a defense that never really took a step back, I do think that Texas A&M is a team that is going to be 10-2 by the end of the year. Probably doesn't make the SEC championship game, but will make the college football playoffs when it's all said and done. When you look at, let's see, number 10, we've got Clemson, right? I think that Clemson can win out for the rest of their schedule, take a loss to Miami. And I think that's why I've got Clemson at 10. You could make an argument for Notre Dame, probably, if they win out throughout their season, to maybe be at 10 or 11 to take Texas A&M or Clemson's spot. I would definitely listen to that argument. But right now, I think Clemson's a better team than Notre Dame overall. I like what they're doing offensively a little bit more than what Notre Dame can do and is doing. So give me Clemson at 10. Ole Miss at 9. Look, the Kentucky loss was bad, but when you go in and look at Ole Miss's schedule, they've got a real opportunity here to get back into the mix with things. Maybe beat a Georgia, but even if they don't beat Georgia and win the rest of their games, they're 10-2, right? They're outside of the SEC championship. But given where they're at now, given where they're already ranked in the AP poll, I don't think that they slide out of the top 12 with a loss to Georgia towards the end of the year. Now, they got to handle business against LSU, which is no easy task, but I do think that Ole Miss is a team that can get it done and make the college football playoffs. Penn State at number 8. We just talked about Penn State. Just look at their schedule. I don't think that Penn State's the 8th best team in the country, but they don't play anybody, right? They're probably going to be 11-1 with a loss to Ohio State by the end of the year, and I think that they're probably the team that I'm most confident in making the college football playoff with a loss, or that's not a conference champion or anything like that. Just looking at their schedule, it is just way too easy. Oregon at 7. I think that there's so I think initially I had Oregon at number 2 with the winning the Big Ten, but now I kind of feel like Ohio State's probably going to win this game this week, and if they don't win that game, I think that they could win at the end of the year in the Big Ten championship. But I definitely think that Oregon's a team that gets in by the end of the year. Got them at 7 right now. They could obviously move up or down in that ranking. Moving on to 6, we've got Tennessee. So Tennessee, they look really good. They have looked really good. When you look at their schedule, I've got them beating Alabama, which is why Alabama's not in this prediction. Alabama at 10-2 with a loss to Tennessee, the head-to-head loss to Tennessee, and maybe even another loss when it's all said and done. They might lose to LSU or Oklahoma or a team like that. I mean, after you lose to Vandy, the doors are wide open, right, for you to get upset by another team. So that's kind of why Alabama is out. Tennessee, I think beating Alabama gives them a good win, but then loses to number 5, Georgia. That game is played in Athens, which is why I have Georgia winning that game. I do think that Tennessee could potentially be a better team than Georgia right now, but with that game being played in Athens, I think Georgia, you've got to give them the slight edge. But Georgia, I think with Georgia, they're going to beat Texas in the regular season in Austin, and then lose to Texas in the SEC championship. That's kind of how I have this playing out, which, you know, you could argue maybe moving Texas to 2 and Ohio State to 1. It's all up for debate, but ultimately those are the 4 conference champions that I have at number 1, Texas winning the SEC, 2, Ohio State winning the Big Ten, 3, Miami. I do think that they take a loss somewhere in the season, but they end up winning the ACC. And then Iowa State right now, look, you could put anybody or just about anybody in the Big 12 at that number 4 spot, but Iowa State just looks like the best team in the Big 12 right now. And that's kind of my reasoning and my thought behind this prediction. I don't think that this is a done deal or anything like that. There could definitely be some teams that sneak in here and some teams that drop out, but that's where I'm at, Mark. What do you think about the bracket as it is right now?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I mean, I Texas A&M. It's funny. We had Texas A&M to start the season pretty in that spot, pretty much, right? It was in that 11 spot, and then we backed off of it because we saw how bad the offense was, and then we saw some consistency this weekend in the offense and some you know, kind of their come up. It could be depending on what they do from here on out. We'll see. But I like Texas A&M in that spot, and I think I don't think Texas wins the SEC, but I don't. They got just as good a chance as anybody, though. I mean, it's splitting hairs, it's flipping a coin, it's whatever, you know. And we don't know who's going to be playing, who's going to be injured at that point. So I mean, you know, you can't predict that stuff. So I don't have any qualms necessarily with Texas being number 1. I don't think they're winning the SEC, but you know, they have a lot easier schedule than Oklahoma did their first year in the SEC. So I think that if they do, I think that'll be you know, part of the reason there. They've got one of the easier paths as far as you know, the big time contenders there in the SEC, whereas Georgia and Ole Miss have really, really difficult schedules there. Yeah, I mean, I like it. Boise State, we probably, probably overlooked them obviously a little bit. We kind of talked about that in our top 25 ranking. So I think we made it right here. I like the ranking for sure.